Hello guys, welcome to my Rofton channel, my YouTube channel. Nashon Discloses. I really appreciate you guys for listening in and chiming in. Hopefully you guys get something out of today's little message and teaching. With that being said, we'll go right into it and go back to our overview. Freedom begins with acknowledging the source of all freedom and sovereignty. We went over that yesterday, and today we're going to be going over this principle. Freedom is the result of accepting God's dominion, mandate, and delegation order. That is to say, taking complete and personal responsibility for ourselves and the management of God's property. We will also be talking about the principle of how we all start out equal, and the only way to lose our sovereignty, property, or equality lawfully to a de jure government, which is a government that is ruled by force, or that rules by force, by fraud, and by deception under the operation of civil statutory law, is to consent to it. Consent is extremely important, and so with that being said, we're going to go on to that point 2 and take a greater look. Freedom is the result of accepting God's dominion mandate, thereby taking complete, personal, and exclusive responsibility for ourselves and the management of God's property. Why is this very important? Well, we have to understand that man was created by God and given authority to act in accordance with God's law, in accord with his nature, in accord with his character. The serpent. Now, listen, we're talking about the Bible. There are many ways to interpret the Bible. You don't have to necessarily see this in a physical way. I think a lot of these stories in the scriptures are, according to the Hebrew understanding, there's 70 ways to interpret one line of scripture, but there's 4 different levels to interpreting scripture. There's the literal, there's the historical, there's the moral, and then there's the spiritual. And all of these things are done in mystical ways. There's mystical understandings, there's mystical interpretations, there are allegories, there are parables, and the whole point of these things is that they're trying to convey a specific and certain type of truth that does and has an effect on our livelihood and our social, and how we interact with our social, basically just our social interactions. Man was created by God and given authority to act in accord with God's law. The serpent offered Eve 2 things: limited liability and limited responsibility. And like the serpent, the government offers us limited liability in exchange for everything that we owned. So they say, you don't have to do this, you won't have to do this, but if you sign this paper, then we will do those things for you, and then you would just pay us to do that, right? And that's the point of taxes, right? You sign this over, you consent to this, and then your liability is limited, and then we will take on that liability for you. And it's this idea that they're doing something for you in exchange for your sovereignty, and in exchange for your rights. Now, God cursed the ground in Genesis, I believe chapter 2 or chapter 3. And God cursed the ground for the purpose of doing what? For teaching man to work, to be productive, and to take responsibility, guys. To work, be productive, and to take responsibility for themselves and for God's property. We have to be able to take responsibility. There are many people out there who don't want to take responsibility for why they are in the situation that they're in, and it's always a blame game. And we do it all the time. We blame how we feel, or why we feel a certain way on other people. We're constantly irritated. We're constantly offended by what other people are doing to us or how they made us feel. But it's time for us to stand up and take responsibility for ourselves, for our livelihood, to not push onto other people responsibility that we have to take up for ourselves. Here's principle 3. We all start out equal. Freedom begins with equality. We cannot be free until we are equal to the government. Sorry, that should say cannot be free. We cannot be free until we equal to the government. Being equal or unequal or inferior to anyone only happens with your informed consent. So if you're going to be unequal and inferior to somebody, you should at least be informed about what you are consenting to, right? That is the biggest truth that I think that we can kind of point out right now, right here. Informed consent. So the foundation of the Constitution is equal protection and equal treatment. And I really want you guys to focus on this idea of informed consent, because it's going to apply. It definitely applies to what's going on right now with the whole vaccines and the mandates and everything else like that. I hate to blow up your ear with that kind of talk, but it's the reason why I'm doing this. It's kind of what stirred up the response in me to champion this cause of bringing people's personal power back. So there's actually this show, and the reason I have these couple pictures up in here is because there's a show called Squid Game. And in Squid Game, you have all these people who are in debt. Hundreds and hundreds of people who are in debt. And basically, because they're in debt, they've been given an opportunity to play these children games for money, right? And so there's nothing technically unlawful about what these guys are doing, except that they did not give them informed consent. These people, when they initially started playing this game, did not know that they were consenting to play a game or die. And so every game, someone dies, or thousands of people die. And it's very interesting, and there's like a whole philosophy about it too. Even one of the main characters, or the main villain, I guess, in this aspect, the leader of whoever's doing this, he talks about how everyone is on equal playing ground. On the outside world, they were treated unfairly, unequally, like inferiors. And now they are all equals. All they have to do is play the game, and whoever wins, wins. Whoever plays it and wins, wins. And then the other people, they die. And unfortunately, when they started playing, they didn't know that they would be dying and getting killed. So that was an example of uninformed consent, or not fully informed of what they were consenting to. They thought it was just a game, and they're playing it. We all start out equal, guys. On the continuation of this, to be a sovereign, so when we use this word sovereign, it means to be absolutely and perfectly equal to any and all governments and non-consenting human beings, right? So people who do consent, you're not equal to those that you sent to, or those who you allow to rule over you. You are inferior to them. To be a sovereign, and I think that one thing that I would like to point out, if I had one point of commentary, I'm trying to limit my points of commentary. If I had one point of commentary to say, I would say that even in our church, we talk about how God is sovereign, right? We use this word, and God is sovereignty. God is sovereign, and only He has sovereignty, right? But that's not true, right? Because He has given us His sovereignty, and He's given us the right to act with His sovereignty, as long as it is within the confines of His nature, character, and function, right? So we are sovereigns too, as long as we act within the rules of the delegation and the dominion man that He has given us. Okay, that's the one thing I don't like about church language, is that it puts everything on God, and then we are limited to basically nothing, right? You're and I don't want to get too into it, but that's the idea. Consent removes equality. If you consent, you cannot form the basis for an injury. Now, you guys will see here that I posted up this little thing here, and this is a safety surveillance of the COVID-19 vaccines. This is a draft that is a working list of possible adverse event outcomes. It's subject to change, but here's all this stuff that if you get the vaccine, or if you want to get the vaccine, that here's all these things that possibly could happen, and possibly could happen to you, right? Now, if you consent, to getting a vaccine, then you can't form the basis for an injury. And that's the unfortunate part about why of the whole situation being forced upon people and being required for people, right? And being mandated on people. And a mandate is something that holds the force of law, right? So that's the whole issue that we are experiencing, especially not only workers, but as athletes now. As the USOPC has required that we get vaccinated in order to participate in any events or those types of things, or have a medical exemption or a religious exemption. But if I consent, then I cannot form the basis for an injury. So if I get hurt, if I get injured, then I have no basis for claiming anything, guys. I am basically stuck with my injury. I'm stuck with a wrong bill of health as soon as I consent. So that's why it's very important. Consent means you remove the protections of common law and the Constitution, which is very important because the Constitution is basically what protects our private rights. Withdrawing consent means to quit any and all government franchises, abandoning all civil statuses to which public rights attach. That is to say, taxpayer. Under the tax code, people are proud to be taxpayers. They're proud to have people literally rob and steal from you. Driver, under the vehicle code. Spouse, under the family code. Resident, under the tax code. So, correcting your civil status in government records to that of a statutory non-resident non-person. And basically this is what I think this is the direction I'm going in. I have a bunch of papers here, boom, bunch of papers, bunch of files, thick with information here. And this is the direction that I am going in to retain and to keep my sovereignty and my private rights, because I don't like the way that the government is doing the things now, and I don't want to participate in it. I don't want to consent to be governed by them anymore. Men are equal in their responsibilities and in their opportunities, not in their abilities, competence, or the outcome of their efforts. And we see this all the time in wrestling. This is a truth. We are equal in our responsibilities, still got to do the same things, still got to go to the same practices, still got to do the same runs, but they're not equal in their abilities, right? Not equal in their abilities, their competence, their ability to understand, or the outcome of their efforts. Sometimes somebody's works hard, they don't get the same outcome as you do, or another person who doesn't work as hard. Equal protection implies that you get to choose one of two systems of protection, or which of the two systems of protection are the best for you. We either have the civil statutory franchise code for public officers called citizens, or the common law and the Constitution for exclusively private people. You get to choose which one of those is better for you, and I would choose the common law one for exclusively private people, because that means that I retain my private rights. This one, you don't have private rights, you have public rights. And then you have benefits and privileges attached to those public rights. The equal protection requires that you must be able to choose to be protected only by common law and the Constitution, which means that anyone who tries to take away the choice and say, no, you have to be a citizen, you have to be under civil statutory codes and laws, they are destroying your private rights and replacing them with public rights and franchise privileges. So essentially, desperate situations are the quickest way to lose your private rights, and that is why the whole government system is set up to create an issue, get you in debt, and then to manufacture solutions in which you have to sign a paper and consent to transfer your private rights over to public rights that they own. And this is number 4. The only way to lose your sovereignty, principle 4, the only way to lose your sovereignty, property, or equality lawfully to a de jure government, and this is the government that rules by force, fraud, and tyranny, a de jure government under the operation of civil statutory laws, to consent to it. Consenting removes any possible remedy for violation of rights beyond the point of your consent. Meaning, if you consent to something, that's it. The point of remedy is basically gone. You don't get to remedy that by the law any longer. And if your rights are violated beyond the point of your consent, then you shouldn't have consented in the first place. Here's Bouvier's maxims of law. I think this is amazing. He who consents cannot receive an injury. Consent removes or obviates a mistake. It is better to suffer every ill or wrong than to consent to it. One cannot complain of having been deceived when he knew the fact and gave his consent. We are going to do a quick summary. And that quick summary of principles is principles 2 through 4. Freedom comes from accepting God's dominion mandate and taking responsibility for yourself and God's property. I think that's fair. I think that is fair. Take responsibility for yourself. Take responsibility for God's property. Limited liability and limited responsibility are a trap and against the purpose of creation, because you're trying to get something for nothing. If you are working and trying to get something for nothing, then you're going against the laws of nature. Why? Because you cannot put nothing in the ground and expect a apple tree or an orange tree. You cannot sit and do nothing and expect the ground to produce fruit by itself. You have to work, and you have to be responsible, and you have to be aware of all the liabilities. You have to take those liabilities for yourself. We all start out equal and are only unequal if we consent to be. So the question is, what are you consenting to